Somebody
Early day.
Okay, you're on. Great. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, everybody, to Senate Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs. And this morning, it's Friday. So we are looking at how we're looking at housing again. And we have one of our wonderful low-hanging fruit programs, which we hope will house ever more people, is Home Share. And Connor, we welcome you to our committee. It is Friday, the 4th of April, just to remind everybody. And Connor, it's yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Connor Cummins, Home Share Vermont. So I'd like to divide up the conversation today just in sort of a 101 of what we do. I know many of you are very familiar with what we do, but it's nice to kind of just do a refresher and give you some updates in terms of data and things like that. It's always fun to look at. And then I'd love to talk about what our plans are for fiscal 26 and how you fit into those plans. And at which point, love any questions, comments, or queries at that moment. So Home Share Vermont is a screening and matching program that matches pairs folks with extra room in their home with folks who are looking for affordable housing. Typically and traditionally, that is older Vermonters who require a little bit of assistance to age in place more comfortably, safely, sustainably, or economically viably. That is not a limitation on the program, however. There are no age restrictions on the program, as you'll see. So that's kind of what we do. It's what we've been doing for, going on 43 years. One of the beauties of working at Home Share Vermont is that we're very confident in the model. We don't have any questions about ironing out the kinks of our model. It works, it's solid, and it's on us to just keep that integrity high, and we do our best on that. So
I did not appreciate it was over 40 years old. I guess I'd forgotten that. That's
I am the exact same vintage as the organization, so put it that way. So it's important to know who's home sharing. I think this is data that I've given you all. I could mention that you've got all this in your handout, and then you've also got more data than this on these one sheets that you're used to seeing from us. That I use
very, very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, but I want to highlight a few things. So one of them is that age range we talked about. Hosts can be as young as 27 and as old as 99. We have one host who's 101 and still not sure she needs it, and hard pressed to disagree. She's terrific. She's on top of her life. She's great. But and then there's folks who are young and have bought a condo and don't like living alone, but don't want to roll the dice with Craigslist. And so they use our service, and that's great too, because we're taking more people over the rental market, which I'm sure you would all appreciate. Yeah. And then the same thing on the other side in terms of guests. The average age is 49, and that can mean someone who's going through a change in life, a job change, a change in marital status, any number of different things.
So the average age is guests.
On the right there, that's guests. Right, on the found housing column on the right there, that's is for guests, and shared their home on the left is hosts. So that just gives you a sense, it's a pretty wide range of people who are using the service, and that's as it should be. It's a flexible model, and we appreciate that. So the other piece that I think is worth noting is the low income percentage. Is a pretty high percentage of folks. So we are really serving folks who are in sort of that vulnerable, sort of dire straits situation here in Vermont, and that number, unfortunately, is kind of going up. I should also note that we think that those disability reporting is a soft number because that's self-reporting, and we just know that number doesn't always get reported at the level that it is most accurate, and that isn't necessarily a problem for our work, but it's just worth noting when you're looking at the data. So let's talk a little bit about financial impact, because I think that is it really interesting for your committee because you straddle the housing and the economic development and sort of all the things that it values. So an investment last fiscal year of $408,000 helped Vermonters save over $1.3 million. That's also a bit of a soft number, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But I wanted to kind of stress or lift up one story in particular that I think illustrates how that happens. So this is Honey and Kayla. Honey lives in Quechee. And she has been working as a childcare provider for decades, and was sort of realizing that her numbers weren't adding up anymore. For whatever reason, her finances were a little more strained. Things were getting difficult. She lives in a comfortable home in Quechee, but is starting to, what I would say, be in a slipping mode in terms of finances. Everything else is fine for her. She's very active. She's very vibrant. She's involved in all her things, but finances were tight. Kayla, on the other hand, was just starting out in her career with a nonprofit down in that neck of the woods. Her family lived about an hour and 15, hour and a half away in dry roads. And she was finding herself having to commute an hour and a bit every day for this great dream job that she loved so much. She really wanted to be doing it. She did that 3 days a week. 2 days a week, she would be staying with friends and family that were about a half hour away, but it was just sort of it was not the living experience she wanted to have as an adult, living with her folks and commuting that long, or living with, I think it was an uncle or someone on 2 days a week. It wasn't, she was cobbling together.
Right.
So enter Honey and enter HomeShare. The two of them hit it off terrifically right from the start. Kayla is now living 15 minutes away from her work. Honey has a more stable income, source coming in. And not for nothing, but these two are absolutely like a great pair. This is them getting ready for their movie night that they do every Friday. They look forward to coming home to hang out with each other. This is not just a marriage of convenience at all. These two are really enjoying hanging out and being friends. And Honey has been living in Clichy for decades as a great tour guide for Kayla. Kayla's more embedded in a different part of Vermont's community. It's just, I'll uplift a couple of these, but there are, literally hundreds of these all over the state.
And how did they find out about each other?
Well, that's us.
How did they find out about you?
Okay, great question. Yeah. So, Honey had heard about us or heard about home sharing as a concept when the Thompsons started their sort of pilot project back in,
so
it was right in the middle of the pandemic, right?
No, the Thompsons have been promoting this.
Right. So they came and got a training from us. This is a little background. Right before the pandemic started, I think it was February 2019, that we gave Shari, who's one of their aging in place coordinators, a training about home sharing, and they had the ambition to start up their own little program. So we kind of helped them, seeded them along in that knowledge base. They went out on their own for a while, and then eventually it was clear that it would just be helpful if we could sort of help them out a little bit more. And so that was part of the expansion plan from fiscal 23, I think. And so we work with them. Shari works part-time for us at HomeShare Vermont. We basically lease her or share her as an employee with the Thompson Senior Center. So which
is our senior center in the Woodbury area.
And when the press releases came out about them or the merging or whatever we're calling that arrangement, that's when Honey clicked in, because she'd been thinking about it. So it was really interesting to hear that was the trigger for her, was like, oh, I've been thinking about this now that there's this other organization I'm in. Right. So,
And so how did Kayla, as a young person, hear about it?
It's not clear. I think it might have been through her employer, because we are talking to employers all over the state, and, we go to job fairs and do the reverse instead of, we go and kind of pitch every single table and say, hey, you should know that this is working for employees. But the young people come at us from a variety of different sources. We do Facebook ads. We do, for a long time, we were on Craigslist and doing things like that. Right. We stopped that now. We have our listings page on our website now. Yeah. So I think it was through her employer, though. Yeah.
Right.
So I want to break down that 1.3 million. It's a big number, and it's worth noting kind of how that works on the Blue side. That is for hosts. That is sort of like an opportunity cost, money they saved if they were paying for the services that those guests provide, because guests gain access to lower than fair market rent in exchange for some services, up to 12 hours of services. So I don't think in this arrangement there's any services being exchanged, but when there are, those are presumably costs that would have to be paid for some other way, whether that's shoveling the driveway, helping with transportation, helping with meal planning, groceries, what have you. So that's where that 444,000 comes in. And then on the other side, the red side, is the guest saving on rent. The average rent that our HomeShare guests are paying is $359 a month. So if you compare that against fair market value, it's generally about a third. Think of it that way. So the reason I mentioned it as a soft number is we don't include that number on the bottom.
So how much on average do they save a month in rent?
Depends on the region. In Chittenden right now, a 1-bedroom is, I think the HUD had it at $1,400 or something like that. So they're paying $1,000 less a month if they're renting a 1-bedroom apartment. That's a estimate.
Yeah, but they're saving a significant amount.
Yeah.
And so they save, but they have a much lower rent, and they have a requirement of 12 hours of service.
No, they can go up to 12 hours.
Okay,
so this is interesting. So $650 is our maximum rent, 12 hours is our maximum service, and you can think of it like a seesaw. So or a scale, maybe makes more sense. So if you're putting more service in, we generally will talk down the conversation to a little less rent. If you're putting in 12 hours of service, typically that's low or no rent. A quarter of our guests are paying no rent whatsoever because they're providing that much service.
It's great.
Or the host doesn't want that. They just want some accompaniment or.
So the huge benefit to homeowners who may want some help with their income is not only additional income, obviously, through this rent up to $650, but also you screen them all. So you sort of talk about how you screen them. And
yeah, I can talk about that right now. Yeah, so every person, whether they're a host or a guest, runs through 6 background checks and 3 reference checks before they're even entered into the matching pool. At that point, then they do an hour-and-a-half interview with our case managers. And then they'll have an introduction, obviously, with the host and with the host or the guest, respectively. So, these people that we are moving along to live with people are vetted to a pretty high degree. We're pretty confident in the character and the intentions of the folks that are moving in. The other piece that's worth knowing is we don't really have a retail model where we make a match and then off you go, we do ongoing check-ins with hosts and guests all the way through their process. Even if we have some hosts and guests who've been doing matching with us for over 15, 20 years, and they still get 3 or 4 points of contact a year to make sure that everything is going the way it's supposed to, and there haven't been changes in relationship or changes in dynamic.
Question regarding the services that are provided.
Yeah.
Is that agreed upon in advance with the homeowner, and is it memorialized or?
Yeah, so that's one of the other things we offer is we hold the match agreement process. So we have a template that we use, and it really gets granular down. On Tuesdays, you're going to provide meals on, whatever the needs are. You're going to walk the dogs every whatever it is. So we make sure that's enshrined. They talk about that before they do their trial match. So they do a 2-week trial match to make sure everything is going well. And at that point, anyone can just say, this isn't working, and we end the match. So people don't give up their leases at that. But at that moment, when they go to that trial match, we created that document with them collaboratively, and we presented it, and they've signed it. And
so they have a contractor like anybody.
Yeah, we don't call it a lease, but by all intents and purposes, probably legally it would stand up as a lease. Certainly be considered a lease. So that's kind of how that gets taken care of. And where our case managers are really valuable is if something changes. Let's say someone has a fall and all of a sudden they need to wait for a hip replacement or whatever. Let's just say for the sake of argument. And all of a sudden the needs change. At that point, our case managers are there to negotiate, can this work with our agreement? Do we need to make adjustments as a result? If not, can we plug you into some other services like SASH or whomever that might be helpful? SASH coordinators love us because instead of their SASH person coming to visit and really feeling responsible for the socialization of their client, which they can still do anyway on their own time if they have it, they know there's someone else there that's going to be talking to them. They know they can check in with another person there that might be able to kind of keep eyes on what's going on if there's something that's more severe happening. So that's kind of what our case managers do. And sometimes what they'll do is they'll manage a graceful exit. There are times when either the needs have moved beyond or someone's moving in with a boyfriend down the road or whatever, something happens. And so our case managers are there to kind of make sure that, as we said, a graceful exit, everyone's leaving on good terms.
For a year, are they?
There's a 30-day notice. So they're kind of indefinite, but there's a 30-day notice requirement. So
if the homeowner dies, for example, what happens then?
Yeah, that's a great question. Then that 30-day notice is still in effect. So the family or survivors or whomever from that family would have to give that 30-day notice. I will say that anecdotally, what we see is a mix. Sometimes it's 30 days and thank you very much. And some days, we had someone pass away. I'll leave the region out of it, but they passed away in sort of October. And the family was in, Maryland and Pennsylvania somewhere. And they said, could you please stay on till the spring? Because we don't want the house empty all
Yes,
winter. We're not going to sell a house in October, in November.
You
could, good luck, but it's not, 6 season is not a selling point normally. So, so they had someone tending the home, paying more rent than before because they weren't helping their father. But that house then was able to be sold on much better terms. They were able to come and go and take care of all the things that happen when someone passes away, with
Very
while
helpful.
having someone who is there managing, tending the store kind of thing.
And
So,
how many case managers do you have?
right now we have 4 case managers plus Shari in Windsor County, who's sort of part-time with us. So
And how many guests do you have at the moment?
I don't have that number off the top of my
Yeah.
head. Last year, we had 274 people who'd been in a match. That was at the end, as of the end of the year.
274?
Yeah, that was the end of the year.
Are you distributed throughout the state?
Great question, Senator.
Improving that.
We're gonna-
That's what we're,
let's
that's
skip
what
ahead to
their
that
app
one.
is about.
Let's skip ahead to that one. I'll skip ahead to that because that's worth talking about. The impacts, I would highly urge you to look at those impact numbers and we can go back and look at them, but I don't think they'll be surprising to folks who are looking at the data you're looking at. People are doing better when they're aging in place with someone supportive. They're doing better when they have more income. They're doing better when they have support. This is pretty.
And we know that's just generally
I mean, yeah, I feel like it's not even worth saying, but
older
I,
people.
right. But I will say that the data supports that this is happening. So our current area is in blue behind me here. So we stretch south to halfway down Windsor County. There's an invisible line that no one thinks of except for me in the middle of Windsor County, and I can't remember the exact name of the town, but there's 6 towns beneath that line that make sort of like I call it the egg crate that goes along the bottom there. So we're not in those towns
Sort of
based on,
Weathersfield or
Yeah,
Reading,
yeah.
West
Across-
Windsor and Windsor South.
yeah, that
Or
neck, yeah.
Weathersfield, Springfield South.
It's Weatherfield in that line. Yeah. And that's basically because the Thompson has sort of a geographic limitation.
Right.
They have, she has a job in that space, so she can't be driving as much as the rest of our case managers, and that's fair. So we expanded to that place in that region in fiscal 23, and also into that little bump into the Northeast Kingdom that you can see there. It looks like a little L. So that's Hardwick, Craftsbury, and Greensboro. And those were really what we've been just calling like a test balloon in the kingdom to just see whether there's interest. Is this something that could work up there?
I would think there'd be huge interest in the Northeast Kingdom.
That's what we're seeing.
And-
So
And in Rutland. You got
Right.
Rutland,
I won't forget.
Thunder.
I haven't forgotten
On your
Rutland,
right.
don't worry. But so I will say that we have a statewide goal. We have had for a while. It's one of the things that was handed to me when I stepped into this position. We have traditionally and continue to move relatively intentionally and slowly, mostly because once you start a match, you don't want to leave someone out in the cold, expecting to be able to have that interaction that we just described, those points of contact. It's not the kind of situation where you can just roll out the carpet and then roll it back up again, because you have people, often multiple seniors, living with people who you put them with. So there's a responsibility there that we take seriously. So we've moved slowly in the past. Having said that, with our expansion most recently, what we've been calling the over the fence folks, the folks that are just on the other side of the line, I started calling. And so that's Londonderry, that's Brattleboro, that's Springfield, that's Danville and Peacham. Peacham, I don't know what's going on in Peacham, but there are about 5 people waiting in Peacham to work with
Peacham
us.
is happening, very connected and engaged.
Well, there you go. They are ripe and ready, and we are in a position where we have to kind of say not yet, because it depends entirely on the bandwidth of our case managers that are also working in Lamoille and Washington and Orange. So
Rutland has some pretty strong senior centers too, that I'm surprised haven't glommed onto this.
well, so what we looked at was, okay, we divided it up into 3 growth areas: was Wyndham, Windsor, the Kingdom, and then Rutland and Bennington. And we kind of said we can't do all of them at once. That's too much of a jump for us. But what we wanted to do is prepare for each jump now. So what we've done so far is we've been building up our infrastructure around training. So we have a new training calendar, a new training manual that fits with our new database that we put in place. So this is what we got from the state. We have started a new process with a bunch of different partners to really leverage state money. So I want to talk a little bit about that in a minute.
Okay.
I want to come back to the actual ask, but here's how we're planning on expanding in a way that is most efficient. Rather than us hiring a full-time case manager and dropping them into a community that they may or may not be super well aware of, we're actually going to be staff sharing or leasing, just like we did with the Thompson. Thompson was the test balloon, with the Council on Aging in the Northeast Kingdom and with Wyndham Windsor Housing Trust.
Right.
And part of the reason we went where we went is the calls were coming from there. That's where the most calls were coming from. And B, those partners presented themselves, and we did a bunch of vetting on the different partners we could work with. And these ones just rose to the top as really solid organizations that are doing great work. So What we'll be doing, like that, I wonder if I can figure it out. What we'll be doing is, that's on. Okay. So what we'll be doing is leasing 2 part-time case managers in the Northeast Kingdom. One orbiting St. Johnsbury, one orbiting Newport. That's just how they run their organization, which makes a lot of sense when you think about the geography up there. And one part-time case manager in Windham County. And they will cover Windham and the bottom half of Windham. And then one full-time intake and reception position in South Burlington. And that's mostly because we need to free up our marketing coordinator, who's Rickson Gary, who needs to move around the state more.
Rick and Gary,
You know,
of VPR.
VPR fame. Yeah, exactly. If you call, you get a nice phone conversation. But he's working reception, marketing, outreach, and managing our survey. It's too much right now. And if we're going to add the amount of applications we think we're going to add, we need to make a change. And so that's where that comes from. So there'll be a 30-hour-a-week position that's opened, and that frees up Rick to be out marketing what we do. Because that's really the measure of our success, is how much people know about us and learn about us. It's very intuitive, maybe in this room right here, this makes efficient sense. But I think for a lot of folks, it is a leap. It is a different thing. It is a stranger in their home for them. And it takes us a while to really make sure that people understand that by the time we're matching them, they're not strangers, and the benefits to them will be myriad. So
I noticed as part of your expansion, Rutland still is not there.
it's not there yet. And I think that part of the reason for that is that's where the calls were coming from. We've since gotten a few calls from Bennington, and I imagine we'll start to get calls from Rutland. I've had some conversation. I think one of the things that's really important to us is not biting off more than we can chew, and make sure that we provide the service that is a high level. I would happily be back here at the beginning of the next biennium and ready to say we're ready for Rutland and Bennington. We'll see how this model works out. This is us taking a big swing relative to our history. We've been 43 years or what have you, and it's only in the last 3 years that we've stretched out into Central
Because you were
Vermont.
really in Burlington.
We were
I mean,
Burlington, Franklin, Grand Isle, Addison for a very long time. And then HomeShare Now had that sort of explosion, implosion situation. We were able to help that out and pick up the pieces there, which was great for everyone, I think. That kind of opened our eyes to, there's a lot more here that we should be doing. So
You've got 235 in the House budget. It's not the governor's budget, is that right?
it's not in the governor's budget this month, this time. Yeah.
And of that 235, let's go back to return on investment
Mhm.
again.
Yeah.
What do you think? What's the return on investment of that?
Um,
Measure it.
I think what we know is that our trend, like the last 2 years, we've had the most amount of matches, the most amount of people in matches in our history. And so one would presume that number is going to keep going up and up and up in the way that we would expect. I don't think in the first year we see that number from that 275 jump up to like 100 or something like that in the first year. But given that Brattleboro is a big base, and St. Johnsbury looks pretty ready and pinching apparently. I think we would see our numbers, definitely crest 300 without really thinking about it over time. And again, not in the first year. In terms of financials, I mean, really the driver on those financials is the cost of the fair market value or the fair market rent going up or down too, because our rent is staying at 650.
Well,
and so
home expenses
are going up. So
are
I
going up.
think the value will continue to go up in that direction.
And we're an aging demographic. So a combination of cost
Well-
increases and aging demographic.
Yeah, and I will also say, that VHFA report was very illuminating. I'm sure you all were very close on that one, but to me, the biggest thing is the cost burden and the household size. More Vermonters are cost burdened than ever before.
Yeah.
And our household size is going down, which means there's empty rooms because our houses are not shrinking. I mean, I don't know anyone who's shrinking their house. And so all of a sudden, especially in Windham County, we know that there are a lot of folks who are living alone or living just 2 people in a bigger house. And so when we look at all those things, we can help with the cost burdened Vermonters. We can help fill those rooms. We can help with affordable housing be a reality. And I think the real value proposition is you're building housing in a way, you're creating housing without any Act 250, without any wastewater permitting, without any
So with no,
construction, with no tariff implications, none of that, and
this is the most reasonable cost per unit we have.
2,700 give or take.
Yeah.
Give or take. I mean, you can double that if you want. my math is off, then that would still feels.
No, but I mean,
But I think, you know, in terms of, I don't know if I'd have a figure for like, it'll be 1.5 million or what have you in terms of their, we saw a big jump mostly because the fair market rent jumps and our rents are always going to pretty much stay the same. We made one adjustment this year that y'all should maybe be aware of is for an ADU, that's a standalone ADU. We raised our maximum rent to $850, and that's mostly because we just need to compete with, we really don't want it on the short-term rental market.
right.
And
Well, if they take their money from the state to develop the ADU, they.
well, that's a whole other thing. Yes. And that's when I mentioned VHIP, like we just had a conversation with them yesterday, and we're hoping to do some training with them so that they understand that folks coming through their system, this is an alternative
Yes.
to find those people that need that fair market value back in a way that you might not be able to do it otherwise. So there's a win-win going on there too.
And Connor, have you met Tom Chitton?
Yes, Senator Hayden.
We're
Um,
talking home share here.
Yeah.
So $2,700 is your cost per unit, basically cost
Yeah,
per guest with
plus
case
or minus, yeah.
managers, and that is the lowest cost per unit of housing we have experienced in this building.
Now, having said that, we're not building up new condos for people
No,
to
but
use.
you're
It's a different way to create
housing.
housing, but it is a very sort of Vermont efficient way to do things.
Yeah.
Something like that.
How many people are in your program again? The number?
At the end of last year, it was 275 we had matched. It's in 4, excuse me. And then our Q3 numbers will be in any day. So we're on pace to keep that up as of my math.
I think Tom has a question.
Sorry, I'm missing part of your presentation. I'll be glad to be sure to watch the YouTube. But you said that households aren't shrinking. My senior in high school is off to college next year, and then I got another one 2 years after, and I'm planning to break off a mother-in-law apartment.
Great.
Your program does that include apartments, or are you really talking about cohabitating in the same?
That's one of
could be either.
that's one of the flexibilities of the program. So if you have an ADU that you want to use as a home share, you can. One of the advantages that we have is, your maximum rent, as I mentioned, for that ADU would be $850, which is probably less than fair market value.
But
Probably
they
could get
get
more.
it.
You're in Chittenden County, you could get more probably. However, what you gain is maybe some extra services that maybe you think would be helpful. So like, for instance, I was a home share host this past summer. I have 2 little kids. I had a date night guaranteed for a week or
that
for
is
6
so
months,
great.
once a week. There was date night childcare for once a week. And it was very easy. She was someone who was a camp counselor. It was not a big lift. She was laughing about the idea that this was helping her pay her rent. But for us, it was massive.
One refuses to go on dates with me now.
Well, that's your own affair. But so I think extra time away, whether it's help with the shoveling, help with the lawn care, whatever things that would
And
be
vetting,
helpful.
the value that you have
Yeah.
vetted
Yeah.
all these people, that is a big value
Yeah.
for people.
Yeah, so it's not a situation where someone gets on an app and then just applies and that's it. We do reference checks and 6 background checks for every single person, host and guest.
Actually, you could partner with Match.com and probably be very.
Well, we have our feelings about how
And every-
we have our feelings about what the algorithms do, but all this to say, that's kind of how that process works. So the reason we're here today is really to sort of lift up the notion of base versus one time. Because right now we had applied for or requested base funding for the reasons we just discussed about not being able to kind of pull back once we started all these matches. But we ended up in one-time funding, which again, we're grateful for, but it does put us in a bit of a bind if we make this expansion, start making all these matches, and then have a situation where we need to scale back. It puts us in a lurch, and more importantly, it puts our clients in a lurch for how they're going to manage without that ongoing support that we provide.
So what's your full ask? The
Full ask is
230,
235.
and that is in the House budget.
That's in the House budget as one-time fund.
And what you're hoping at some point is to move to the base.
Correct. So we felt like, why wait a year? Let's talk about it now. But also to keep you informed about what the expansion is. I will mention a little bit about sort of the timeline that we have kind of worked on. We mentioned a little bit about this already, but we took the opinion that it was best to buckle up our skis and be ready. So that means that we are ready the training modules and things that we built will work for Wyndham Windsor Housing Trust and Northeast Kingdom Council on Aging. But when it comes time to move to Rutland, whether that works with Rock or some other organization down in Rutland, we'll be ready to go. There'll be no hesitation where we'll have that model all locked in and ready to go. So we spent the time, energy, and money on that already, independent of this, with the intention that should we get a green light from the state, we'd be able to start in July. We've already talked about timing with the partner organizations that we are working with, that we would start training in July or August, probably end of July, beginning of August. And that would allow us to start marketing July 1 and really start getting the base going much, much faster. One of the challenges we had with the Windsor expansion was that it was an October start. I was just starting there, it took a while to kind of get the machinations going, and we didn't want to wait for that this year. So we are basically at the starting line, ready to rock when it's time. And that was important for us, not just for this fiscal year, but also, as I said, when it comes time for Bennington and Rutland, we'll have that infrastructure ready to go.
Great. And who advocated for you in the House? Did you have House General advocating for you, or did you go directly to appropriations?
We spoke with General Housing, and we also spoke with Dan a lot in Human Services or Human Services Committee. Both of those, we got recommendations from both of those committees.
Okay, so you were on there.
Yeah, we were on their ask. Yes.
On that same point, so we were 235 one time. Is that in the governor's recommend?
It was not, but yeah, it was not.
We never explored charging a fee for service to defray some of the costs.
So we do charge a one-time match fee, and it's on a sliding scale based on your income. So if you're someone who is coming to us, and it's on a very fixed income and things are tight, then you're going to pay a lot less than someone who is home sharing in a second home or something like that.
How much revenue does that?
20,000, that's give or take about 20,000. It's not, as I say, it doesn't keep the lights on for us typically.
Then what's the match fee roughly?
It can be as low as like $60 and as high as $500, I think. And that's a one-time match fee. It's not something you pay on application. It's only when you finish your trial match and you're like settled and everything is going well.
And who pays that? The homeowner?
Both.
Both.
Yeah. Both
Right.
sides. Yeah.
So it depends on.
Yeah. It's priced so that it keeps folks relatively serious, but also defrays a little cost, but isn't a burden to the folks that are involved in it.
And as I recall, there is another home share, not home share exactly, and does slightly there, but in southeastern Vermont.
So Anna Marie does what I would
Yeah.
call sort of education and advocacy around the concept of home sharing. And so we've been talking with her. It's highly likely that she'll be part of our marketing.
Yeah, it
spend.
strikes me
Yeah.
that instead of sort of this modest competition she has.
Oh, no, this
But
is.
partnering makes a lot.
Right.
of
Yeah.
sense.
We've been talking with her quite a bit, and we'll continue to. Basically, we got a sense of what she was interested in being a part of, and we talked with her when we talked about vetting the different organizations in the different regions. She was part of that process. We had a conversation with her, sussed out whether she was the right match for nesting this program with her. Case management is not what she's bringing to the situation
Right.
now. But what she does bring is an incredible marketing ability and knowing that region. And so we fully suspect that there'll be a collaboration with her on that front.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have the same goal in mind for sure. And I think one of the advantages of her is she's not tied to the region. She can, she presents all over the country. And so, but she is also a good neighbor. And so she knows a lot of folks down there. And so we're expecting that as we grow, we'll be collaborating with her in a variety of ways.
Terrific.
I focused on the case management because that was the big driver for us. That was the real reason to connect with either of these groups, was a pedigree of case management.
Right.
With the populations we work with.
And Wyndham Windsor Housing Trust is already partnering on VHIP and
Right.
ADUs. I mean, we're doing a different type of case management, but they're already partnering with the public on
Right.
enabling reduction of home costs and
Right. And I think,
opportunities for income improvement.
yeah, they're trying to figure, they have sort of an embarrassment of riches in terms of their case management team. So we're trying to figure out exactly which individual is going to be that person. It's not clear whether it'll be one of their housing counselors or someone who's involved with VHIP but those are details we're going to iron out in the next couple of months.
That's great.
But our MOUs are drafted and ready with them. We're working those through, and at some point they'll get lawyered up, and we'll figure out the exact language. But it's, you know, the general principles are all agreed upon right now. So, so we've done that work ahead of time.
That's terrific. Any other questions? Great, terrific. Anything else you want to add?
Thank you for doing this. It's not a great year. I imagine it's very difficult to do what you're doing right now, and what you're standing on probably feels very uncertain. And so,
Well, I
Piece of cake.
yeah, it's confusing. So I think, given just referring to how difficult it is, I think just given what's happening to people's 401ks and people's savings, the the uncertainty of the stock, what's happening with people's portfolio, period, you may see huge growth share.
this is so. I'll mention one thing that was in my notes that I didn't really get to, which is, you know, one of the things that we think of is, and we don't track it because you'll understand why when I start talking about what it is, the savings of social service organizations that would otherwise be supporting these folks. And it's really hard to track that because you're talking about sort of a negative opportunity.
You could do a pilot of it with something like the Thompson.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, we feel like our data is pretty strong without that extra notion, but I think we'd be wrong not to mention it and note that the savings to the state are not just in the pocketbooks of the folks who we're serving, but also in the extra traveling nurse and work things that and SAF programs and other things like that may not need to. These folks might not need to access yet.
Right.
And the congruent housing for assisted living, which is a very difficult market, right? If you want to call it that. So there's the savings kind of go on and on and on and on. And you know, I'm known to blather on about it, but I think you're remiss not to note that as for $235,000 a year, that makes a huge impact to a whole different region, 2 different regions now. So anyway.
Well, thank you. This is really terrific. And as we look at all our housing options for increasing housing opportunities for people, it's certainly a great option. And one we, I think, hope, at least I think, grows.
Right. So, you know, let me know if there's anything you need from me. I'm happy to come back and talk to you anytime.
And you're still headquartered in
South Burlington is our office. We're right in the Cathedral Square building with them, in United Way. And then we have an office down here on Berry Street, or adjacent to Berry Street as well. And then Thompson as well.
That's terrific. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very much. So before Erhard gets here, Heidi, do you have the copies of those? Erhard's not here either. Coming. So Erhard is here. Oh, Erhard, come join us.
So polite.
Well, that's Erhard. Connor, thank you very much. That was great.
I'm not going
Erhard, welcome. Yes, you still have your slides. Who's going to send it off? I don't know.
I can also use. You out.
Okay, great.
Thank you. And Heidi, we have Erhard's hand up. Yeah. And they are where?
Just.
You got to.
The home.
At the bottom of the box,
Yeah.
suspenders.
Yeah, at the end of upstairs, on the bottom of the, well,
I've done printing
Well,
and help me to say.
it's all right.
There it is. Is this it?
Keep the
Yeah.
paper industry in business.
Okay, great. Erhard,
Forestry.
Yes, okay.
Erhard, welcome.
Thank you.
It is such a joy to have you here.
Thank you so
We
much.
are old colleagues here at Within House. And I assume you know everybody, but you may not have met David yet. Bye, Connor. Thank you. Erhard, welcome.
Thank
It
you.
is
Thanks so
good to
much.
have you.
Been a while since I've been in this chair. In
Good to have
these chairs, so.
Good to have you.
Appreciate the time.
Well, we appreciate your work. So if you kind of introduce yourself, thank you for sending a memo ahead, but introduce yourself and let it rip.
Thanks. So, for the record, Erhard Monaco with the,
not with anyone, right? I'm retired. My last employment before I retired was I spent just under 3 years working for Senator Sanders as an outreach representative here in Vermont, as well as for about a year in that time period as his housing policy advisor. And before that, as I think most of you know, I spent almost 25 years in the building here working for the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition. Now the merge with the Homeless Coalition to form housing and homeless alike of Vermont. So sort of a melding of affordable housing interests as well as folks that provide shelter and supportive services to our neighbors who are unhoused. I have not been following super closely while I was more focused on federal issues, but this year I decided to try and get back into looking at what you folks here under the Golden Dome were doing. And I'm aware of some of the things that you've done over the last couple of years, especially around regulatory review and changing, making our land use policies better suited to produce more affordable housing and working on the supply side. I'm also aware, especially since a lot of the funds that came through the building and through the state were federal funds over the last number of years, especially COVID. And that was something that I worked on for the senator. I'm proud to help him bring tens of millions of dollars into the state through various earmarks for affordable housing developments.
Which we continue to be grateful for and are continue to be rolled out. As these projects take a long
It
time.
was actually probably one of the most difficult things that I did when I was working for the senator, as well as one of the most rewarding, having advocated for many, many years, trying to get you folks to put more money into housing. I was finally able to put some in myself through Senator Sanders.
One of the last things we worked on together, the $35 million bond.
That was 2017.
2017.
I stopped working at the State House in the winter of 2021, so a year into COVID.
No, so that was considered a big deal for us. Then in this committee, we helped spearhead that. And then, of course, sadly, one of the silver linings of COVID was the $600 million we were able to plow into all aspects of housing.
Thanks to the coronavirus relief.
Yes. So that was, there are two things that were real silver linings for us. One is an incredible upgrade in our IT life. That we were able to have people participate by Zoom, that we can now comfortably participate by Zoom. That happened overnight, and it would have taken us ages otherwise. And then the other is this huge amount of investment in housing that we received, and that was
you all did
great
incredibly. You all did incredibly well with that. I mean, I don't think there's a state that invested more per capita in affordable housing with pandemic funds than Vermont, and obviously made a lot of headway. And that really kind of brings me to why I'm here today. Obviously, that money is gone. Well, some of it's still working its way through the system. There are still projects that are being developed and that are in the process. But with that loss, and also with everything that's going on at the federal level right now, where we are, as a result of
Earhart is just launching.
As a result of the policies that we're seeing enacted, over the last since January 20th, and we'll probably continue to see enacted. We're going to see a massive shift of federal dollars that are no longer going to go to anti-poverty programs. And I don't know if you guys heard, but Whitey seems to be on the
I read that last night,
which is absolutely devastating. And will clearly, if it is not funded, it will result in people dying in Vermont, and as well as in some of the Southwest, some of the states where they use lighting for cooling more than we don't use it for heating. So
was the money slashed? Because I read that
right
the
now
staff
it's
was
the staff, and we're still good this year in terms of the current what remains in heating season, but what will be in jeopardy, I think, is
What's the amount involved?
Vermont,
23 million.
it's varied, but it's over 20 million. I believe it's $23 million.
That's what it said yesterday in the news. That we had to look, the possible exposure is 23 million in money.
It was a lot higher under the ARPA funds and during the pandemic. So, my basic message to you, and I was really impressed with your committee bill. I also, looked at, the one that House General produced, and I know there's some differences, and, I guess, your challenge is going to be to meld the two bills at some
Not
point.
so hard. I'm working on it.
But one of the things that I noticed that was kind of conspicuously absent from your original bill was the $27 million that the House bill, at least originally when the bill came out of committee, invested in VHCD, and that was above and beyond the statutory amount. And obviously, it's wonderful that the governor saw fit to put the full statutory amount into his budget, and hopefully that will make its way through the appropriations process here. But in addition, because of the incredible deficit that you all know well, and I know you've had testimony from all of my former colleagues in the housing world about how deep that deficit still is in terms of numbers of units. What I wanted to do is focus a little bit on the deficit for those folks that I would say are really the folks that need affordable housing the most. And that's our lowest income folks. So part of the process of my memo was to provide you all with some data around affordability. I know you've gotten a lot of affordability data from Moore Collins, from Gus and Polly Major, and all of my former colleagues, but I haven't seen the focus on the needs and the affordability gap for the very lowest income folks. So my plea to you, and I know your bill is over in the other body and their bill is here,
And all our bills are with no money at the moment.
and none of them, well, that's pretty typical. I mean,
Yeah, no, I know.
policy committees always put money into their bills and have good intentions, and appropriation strips them out, and you get what appropriations what sees fit in the end as they're balancing the general fund needs. That said, I know you all speak to your appropriations colleagues, and so I would urge you, as the process, now that the Senate has the bill from the House, that you speak to those colleagues and urge them to put additional dollars into VHCD. The House bill, the $27 million extra that Representative Mahaly had his committee had put into the bill was reduced to $5 million. That's what appropriations and the House sent over to you. So I'm hoping that the Senate can do better. And part of my message to you is the reason I think it's important to put money into VHCD, in addition to all of the many reasons that you heard on the Housing Conservation Legislative Day and that you've heard in testimony outside of that day, is simply because VHCD money, if it's for rental, the ceiling is 100% of area median income. That's but most of the dollars that goes into their multifamily, and that's for multifamily, most of the dollars that go into multifamily are significantly below that. So for significantly lower income folks, much VHCD money goes in tandem with the federal low-income housing tax credit, where the ceiling is 60% of area median. And when they layer in the National Housing Trust Fund dollars from HUD, and we're hoping that they're not going to get cut for next year. State receives a small state minimum. When they're layered in, VHCD is able to assist folks in rental housing all the way down to 30% of HUD area median income. And a lot of these numbers are in the memo that I sent you. I can go over some of those in a minute. When we're talking about trying to get folks out of motels, VHCD is the prime source with the funds that it brings to the table to help get folks into permanently affordable housing, and out of motels. It's also the funding that does the most to house our workforce. And by workforce, I'm talking about folks that are in the 50 to 60% of HUD area median income range. There are our janitors, our construction workers, LNAs, folks that make the economy run, and that we rely on for basic services. I saw that you put a fair amount of money into your original bill. Obviously, it got stripped out for middle income housing. I'm not saying that you shouldn't put any money into middle income housing, but what I am saying is that you should prioritize the lowest income housing and the funding that funds the lowest income housing for rental. And it does that for home ownership too, through the shared equity program that Champlain Housing Trust and the other trusts and nonprofits around the state that run home ownership programs. They're able to get folks, significantly lower income folks, together with home ownership counseling, into permanently affordable housing through their shared equity programs. And again, that's something that the DHCD funds and is the primary funding agency for. And the other main point that I would make to you, and again, kudos for all the work that that you all have done and that the General Assembly has joined you on in terms of making it easier to develop housing of whatever income level. I actually, in my retirement, one of the things I decided to do was get on the Berlin Planning Commission again, which I used to be on like 40 years ago. And I dare say we, as a result of some of the mandates in the Home Act and in Act 181, we've created, Burlington has created what I would say is probably the most aggressive infill upzoning in the country.
The Hula project should be taller. And you know that. The Hula project should be taller than 8
I was
stories.
not involved in that.
You can always revisit
I'm going to take
it. You
a
can
pass.
always revisit it.
You know, there was a lot of controversy around that, especially from city councilors in the South End.
You can revisit it.
Told you want it.
It started at, they had a proposal for,
It's supposed to be 8 or 10 stories, I remember, and they
it's,
set it
no,
down.
it's down to
not.
8. It's
It's
down
down
to
to
8.
eight.
Well, that's the
They
high.
they started
just-
at 14, and obviously that's a high number, but I thought it shouldn't go below 12, and then it was at 10 and then 9, and now it's at 8.
Right.
Yeah,
and
right.
so, I mean,
and it steps down further
Earhart, like you
to
taught
6 and
me
to 4.
everything I know, you and Sarah Carpenter, but you created a monster because we can't afford to build our way out of this as government alone.
Right.
The cost of these units is so high that you are on the planning commission. Things need to be taller in Burlington.
Yeah.
The reason that our units cost so much more than Maine and New Hampshire is a density issue. I'd like to have this conversation publicly, Earhart,
Yeah.
because this can't keep happening. We can't buy our way out of this problem.
I'm here to say that you need to put as much money
Then
into.
all the buildings need to be taller that we put the money into.
I would not disagree with you.
Then please make the Hula project taller again. We should not be investing state money in projects that are 8 stories.
There may be an opportunity.
Bobbin Mill is taller.
Given some of the resignations on the city council, or not resignation, but
Some
folks that-
decisions about what people are going to run for.
You want taller buildings in Rutland?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Yeah.
I understand density
Yeah, no, we all get
and I
that.
understand economics.
It's killing us.
Yeah.
It's killing us, Earhart. We cannot invest in projects that are small.
Yeah.
And
Well-
towns, Burlington especially, needs to get on board with that.
We've got a pretty tall building in the middle of downtown.
Exactly. Everything should be allowed to be as tall as that. And how tall is that?
It is, I believe it's 10 stories.
Is that all?
Maybe 12.
I think it's
Maybe
12.
Started at 14.
Every inclusionary zoning requirement has to include density. And you know that's the unfinished business
Yeah, I
of
actually,
the housing community from the last several decades.
I helped write Burlington's inclusionary zoning ordinance.
Right.
And density was the quid pro quo for providing some
It
affordability.
should be written in.
It is.
What is it written in at?
What's
Your density bonus if you,
it depends on the zone, and it depends on downtown now has it has floor area ratio required, so it doesn't go by density anymore, and that's kind of changed the equation.
I think that's a bad thing because you want more units, not just.
Well,
people
what
having
we
units.
do, it's not a density bonus in the sense of additional units. It's, you get a higher floor area ratio, for inclusionary zones. So, yeah. Are you familiar with floor area ratio and using that as a way to,
Tell me why that's
Density.
better,
um,
because otherwise I'm gonna start asking for units in her.
yeah.
Okay, but so Earhart, does that improve density of the floor?
It does. If you increase the floor area ratio, you're creating a larger building, and that's giving you.
Is it though?
Could you give us an explanation of what you need?
Yes, so simply put, if you have a floor area ratio of 1.0 and you have a half acre lot, you can fill the entire lot with 1 story. If you want to go to 2 stories, you fill half the lot with 2 stories. If you want to go to 4 stories, you fill a quarter of the lot and you can get 4 stories. So, it's the ratio between, your total square footage and the lot that it's, the square footage of the lot that it's on.
How is that better than getting more floors and more units?
Planners will tell you that it's an easier way to look at a building. You don't get involved in how many units. You're basically leaving it up to the developer and their development team to figure out how to maximize the size of the building. You get less into a lot of the, what color is it? What's the siding? If it meets, the basic dimensional requirements. Buildings don't go through all of the many buildings will just get approved by administrative review. So for instance, Winooski, which is gone, you've seen a lot of development in Winooski that's along the corridors, that's going to floor area ratios. And a lot of those buildings, if I'm not mistaken, were approved through basically administrative review because they met the.
But I guess I'm wondering why you would require a setback in downtown Burlington. That's what I'm hearing you say. Why couldn't you fill your whole lot and go up?
There's actually less setback in downtown.
But you're saying
all the buildings are closer to the street.
So, but your floor area ratio models seem to say that the less of your lot you used, the more you could go up. That's all
I was just describing it in theory. That's not necessarily.
But if
the way
you
it
have,
works out.
if you include inclusionary zoning,
Mhm.
what is the density bonus you get?
So instead of, let's say, in
Because
a
I think this is-
hypothetical,
Yeah, long term, this is, I think, an area that we're going to be
If we're giving
focusing.
state money to anything, it needs to be bigger and taller. And we're gonna start requiring that.
Right, and I think.
So that local planning commissions can't bring down the number of stories.
Yeah.
And I think that message has just been delivered.
Yeah.
Very clearly, but I think, and we're going to be working on a density algorithm that we're working on.
You're welcome to help me with that.
Yeah, and we would
Happy
appreciate
to.
your help on it.
it does, because municipalities are more going to floor area ratios and less to density and unit. That would be something that I would hope that you would factor in the theoretical example that I gave you. So the density bonus might be where the underlying district might have a FAR of 1.0, you might get a bonus of 25%. So the FAR would be, the FAR would be 1.25, and you could add that additional square footage to your overall building.
By going up.
By going up, yeah. Or it depends on the zone, it depends on the size of the lot.
That's the problem.
So I would, I think we're wanting very much to work on
That's
this.
the problem.
And we appreciate your continued work. I think the message is
I
clearly given here. And I think we're all hoping very much to both build up and.
What would you
and
do
denser.
to lower the cost per unit?
you need more units to spread fixed development costs over more units. I think we're getting hung up in units. higher FAR basically means you could fit more units into the form of the.
Unless they tell you you can't go taller.
Well. Yeah.
That's a piece of it.
That's the problem in Burlington. It's ridiculous.
Well, it's.
A new 8-story building in the middle of a housing emergency.
That was. I'm not going to claim credit for that. I was not involved in that. I was not involved in I just got on the planning commission.
Well,
last summer.
the progressive administration can revisit that.
Yes. Oh, I think we need, perhaps that's
And
another thing we need to
I
do.
mean, having spoken to the mayor, I know she is all over maximizing the amount of development in the South End.
And going up.
Yeah, we haven't discussed additional height in this meeting, but I can bring that to the table.
That would be great.
Great. Thank you. Why don't you then continue with your
Thank you.
testimony?
So I think where I was saying that land use planning and deregulation, while it may unleash the market, given costs at this point, given construction costs, and I think you pretty much touched on this, Senator, given current construction costs without subsidy, it is impossible to build workforce housing or housing for our lowest income folks. I costed out as part of working on our neighborhood code, worked with an architect to cost out what could be developed under through infill development, and we couldn't figure out a way that developers currently in Burlington are going to be able to build and pencil out a 2-bedroom unit at less than $2,800 a month, which is not affordable to folks that are at 60% of median income, or even at 80% of median income. The other part of my overall message, and I know you've been shown numbers that the permanently affordable housing development is probably the priciest and the most expensive development. But I will say that if you look at life cycle costs, it is the housing that is going to give you the biggest bang for the taxpayer buck over time. And in my memo, I go into how many folks are familiar with Northgate Housing in Burlington. It's still the single largest. It's in the New North End of Burlington. It was developed using a legacy HUD project back in the late 60s, early 70s. 336 units. It's resident owned and controlled through a nonprofit. It was basically saved from being flipped in the late 80s, early 90s. And the rents that
when it became resident owned?
It took time. It was a gradual process of moving more residents onto the board of the ownership entity and fewer community members. I was actually on the board for 30 years as a community representative. But over 30 years, because of the perpetual affordability requirement, what was initially a $20 million project with about $3 million of VHCD funding put into it back in 1990. It has been preserved for over 30 years. The rents are, even the so-called market rents are way, way, way below market, because over time they've been held low as a result of the VHCD and all the other funding that.
So the rents are stabilized. But I thought you said it was owned.
It's owned and controlled by the residents through a nonprofit board, and they hire a management company that.
So they have a fee, not a rent.
It's rent. It's rent. It's owned by a nonprofit corporation, much the way Champlain Housing Trust, or one of the other nonprofits, owns housing through partnership. Let me kind of skip to the Northgate portion of this. 35 years ago, this $20 million public investment in Northgate, if you take some of the numbers that you've been presented in terms of per unit development costs for permanent affordable housing, which I think is in the over $500,000 range, I costed that out. What cost $20 million back in 1990 to save Northgate would probably cost roughly $180 million today, based on today's cost. So, to me, that's a great example of how an investment in permanent affordable housing through the HCD and some of the other sources that were brought to bear, and that are typically brought to bear in affordable housing developments, how that pays off over time. And the rents, I talked to the property managers just a couple of weeks ago. So the so-called market rate rents are $813 now for a one bedroom in Chittenden County, Verona, $936 for a two bedroom, and $1,175 for a three bedroom. And just a very quick internet search, I looked at typical rents in the Burlington area right now. Those compare to market rents of $1,800 for a one bedroom, $2,400 for two, and $2,600 plus for three bedroom. So the Northgate market rents after 30 years are less than half of what the current market rents are that are unsubsidized. And to me, that just is a great example of what requiring permanent affordability through the HCD, what that yields over time.
Right.
It may be a larger investment up front, but it pays
dividends
over
in the back end. Education.
Earhart, I wonder if we could talk about Decker Towers and Burlington Housing Authority for a second, because, you know, when Steve Murray comes to us and says, I can't even afford basic security measures, I can't afford to keep our buildings safe. The rent prices, you know, are important for people in fixed incomes, but it's not even enough to keep people feeling safe in their residences.
We had a hearing, as you, I think.
And of course, Steve asked for money from the city of Burlington, and I'm sympathetic to that, but there are unsubsidized costs that are really hurting.
When I was still working for Bernie, I met with Stephen, the delegation outreach staff, David Scher for Mecca's
Miles, I know.
and Miles for Senator Buck's office. We all met with Stephen early on, and I think the problem is HUD. HUD's rent increases that are allowed for Decker Towers are extremely low. They basically, as rents are escalating rapidly in market rents throughout Vermont, but especially in the Burlington area, they've only been allowed, if I'm remembering right, roughly 1.25%, maybe 1.5% increases a year in the rents. And they're simply not able to operate Decker Towers in a responsible manner.
So you appreciate that even if we subsidize housing, you often have to increase rents, at least at inflation.
When
Or CPI,
the nonprofits have to pro forma their operating costs, they have to do 30-year pro formas, before VHFA and VHCB and Vermont Community Development Program will approve those, and they have automatic rent escalators in there. Usually they use 3%.
Right. So we're addressing this with mobile homes too. I mean, the lot rent increases are a challenge right now.
CPI plus one.
But this situation is how you have now navigated the federal system well enough to know, how do we have a recommendation on, or would you think about, how can we, without violating anything that HUD requires, how can we enable a place like Decker Towers to increase their rent in a way that
one of the things that we suggested to Stephen was that Decker Towers really needs to look at, and again, this is all in the backdrop of, 50% of HUD staff are being slated for cuts to be cut.
We appreciate we're in a bad spot right now.
But absent that, one of the things that we did at Northgate, because we had capital needs, we weren't able to do the renovations that we wanted in 1990 initially, and every development has capital needs over 20 years. It needs to replace the roofs, needs to replace the heating systems, what have you. We went through a HUD restructuring process that allowed us to do a 20-year capital plan And then to raise rents in order to raise funds over time for that capital plan. That is a type of restructuring that I would hope would be available to Decker Towers, and that would allow Decker Towers to address its capital needs as well as its operating budget needs. And that was one of the messages that we gave to Stephen. I think, he has a different board now. Before Mayor Weinberger stepped down, there was a change in the board, and I think that board is watching BHA and watching the finances at Decker Towers much more closely. A couple of them have housing experience and housing background, and so
But that's still dependent on HUD acting.
that is
What can we do?
Yeah.
Without violating our HUD agreement? I would really like us to think about what we could do to supplement something like, and I don't know how many other housing developments like Decker Towers there are in Vermont, but my guess is there must be a couple. Right?
well.
Anyway.
Decker Towers is former public housing, so
Yeah.
it's basically formerly a creature of HUD.
Yes.
Our housing authorities are municipal corporations. They're founded by the municipalities that host them. But essentially their funding comes from HUD, and they've all converted, all except for Barry, have converted to something called the rental, the acronym is escaping me now. It's RAD. It's rental assistance demonstration or something like that.
So the Vermont Housing Authority, Brattleboro Housing Authority, all of
Brattleboro.
those transitioned to.
They've all
they can raise
transitioned
rents.
to this because HUD's operating funds for public housing they were constantly underfunded. There were some years where I know Vermont Housing Authority was getting 75% of the operating funds annually that HUD itself estimated the housing authority would need in order to operate responsibly. So they changed to this other program to try and up their annual operating costs, but it hasn't actually fully, given them enough funds to operate.
So Decker, all these housing authorities that are like little municipalities, all of them changed.
Yeah.
Their
They all changed to this RAD rental assistance demonstration.
except Decker Tower.
No, Decker Towers changed also in the
But then
hopes
why
that
is it suffering so much more than,
part
I
of
mean,
it is
this isn't
because
what we're hearing from Brattleboro Housing Authority.
I would say that it was not as well managed historically as it should have been.
Got it. And I guess I want you to finish your memo because we're at time almost. I'd love to have us think about how we can help them increase that rent, because that rent is just unsustainable.
The rent,
Maybe a big problem.
the rent is a function of HUD, and that is going to be
I
extremely
know the
difficult.
question I'm asking you is how can we help them?
What I'm telling you is I don't think you can, at least not with federal dollars. If you were, if your appropriators were willing to appropriate state funds, that would be.
Or city.
A different matter. The city actually did appropriate some funds from its housing trust fund so that they could make some capital improvements, and that freed up dollars to higher security, which is what they needed.
Yeah,
They
which
needed
came after us. Came after our
They
public.
desperately needed security to prevent folks that shouldn't have been in the building.
Right. So we have derailed you a little bit, but all very interesting and important conversations.
Sorry, I'm having a case of deja vu.
Yeah, no, I
Been here
appreciate it.
before.
And so the original ask from our House counterparts
Yeah, it was
was, I
27
thought it was 15 million, but you're saying it was 27.
20 for VHCB, it was 27 million was in the bill.
Additionally
Passed
to
that.
their,
In addition to
to the governor's
statute, in addition to the statutory funding in the
Right.
governor's budget. And House appropriations and the House passed House version of the big bill wound up with 5 million. And I'm just urging you in the strongest possible way to advocate with your colleagues on appropriations. I know they probably got
Yeah.
one of the tougher jobs in the building, having sat in both appropriations committees for many, many years.
right,
I know how tough that is, but as the housing committee, I would look to you folks
Right.
to
and we're having Gus in because we sort of divvied this up, our committee and theirs, and they were gonna do the main VHCD ask, and they did. And so we'll be considering it. Gus will be coming in.
That's
So-
great.
And we did a number of things that they weren't able to get across.
Well,
the
yeah, you
line.
worked
We
on
got-
the TIF,
We
mini
got
TIF.
across the line. Yeah.
I saw
So,
that.
and they are working on that. And yesterday, Keisha presented our housing bill in-house general and it went
Yeah,
well.
I mean, I think that the chair in the House believes they're in parallel, that
Yes.
can be dovetailed nicely. Were you saying you think there's gonna be a LIHEAP shortfall that we should have a figure that we're thinking about?
I don't think we'll know, for a while yet.
Yeah.
It was floated yesterday at 23 million.
And it's interesting,
It's 20, yeah, it was floated at 23 million. As you know, the federal government just got funded for the rest of the
Right.
federal fiscal year
right?
through the continuing resolution. And, you know, appropriations committees in the House and Senate will probably, create budgets over the summer for, federal 2026. And, you know, we're actually, the next step is the president, Trump administration will, put forward its own budget. In normal years, the, president's budget is usually then on arrival in Congress, and Congress writes its own budget. It's a little different from here. But we won't have any indication, I think, of what, the appropriations committees will do until, this summer when, the various subcommittees mark up their budget.
And this is also the funding for cooling, which
Yes.
is really interesting because
In-
we're gonna need to talk about that.
Yeah,
So this
on our next
is heating and cooling.
it's heating and cooling. Vermont doesn't use it for cooling.
We might.
Well, the
I think we
future
may be.
is, yeah, we're there, but
So your main message to us, your memo is very fulsome. It's a fulsome memo and we really
did you
appreciate it.
expect anything less from me?
No, we expect you to be fond of information and lively discussion. Thank you for this. Thank you for this. But your our main takeaway is support VHTV as full as we can. We were, quite honestly, many of us were relying on the additional money that was also in the BAA, which is now something that we're gonna have to be rethinking
That
and
was-
incorporating in other ways.
Also
So-
jettisoned in the,
So there were other things going on. And sadly, that is probably not making it across the line.
I know you've heard a lot of numbers, especially, you know, in terms of overall units needed. Let me just throw out a couple before,
Okay, and then we're gonna have to.
before I end. And these are from the National Income Housing Coalition. So they're not from the Housing Needs Assessment. They're based on the American Community Survey. NLHC, National Income Housing Coalition, and just spent a week with David Foss from Becker Towers down in DC. We need over 20,000 units for extremely low income Vermonters. These are folks at or below 30% of high area median income, which for a 4-person household is just under $34,000 a year. So we're talking about maybe a single parent with a low wage service sector job that's making maybe around 15, 16, 17 dollars an hour. That is the size of the challenge at the low end of the spectrum. And we can do all of what you're suggesting in terms of building height and more density and all that. But creating market rate units is not going to help those folks.
But Burlington has inclusionary zoning. And so Burlington's share of the number for the next 5 years is 2,000 units.
Yeah.
So you get us 2,000 units and we will have more money to be able to support low income people. That's how this works. And the progressives need to have a pro-growth, pro-density agenda. Otherwise, we're in a downward spiral.
No, they were actually very supportive and wanted to actually extend our neighborhood code, which was the upzoning that we did as a result of the Home Act. Wanted to extend it to the New York end, but that was treated by
So the other,
non-progressive.
Right.
so this committee also considers wages and income. So we not only need to house people with loans, we need to increase people's income.
Yeah, well, that's the
This
other
is a
part of
crisis.
inflation. That's the other
Exactly.
part.
So I would thank you very much. Your message is received. I hope our concerns have been received as well.
Yeah, they have.
Go forth and do brilliantly in Burlington. Thank you, Earhart.
It's one of the reasons I got on the planning commission.
Once an advocate, always an advocate. Thank